Hello, my name is Chris. Today I'm going to talk with you about RFID technologies and how businesses use them to help them make money. So first off, what is RFID? RFID is radio frequency identification. RFID is a technology that employs a microchip with an antenna to broadcast its unique identification to receivers. So where did this system originate? Well, back in 1935, a man named Sir Alexander Watson, or Watts as he was called, created a system called radar. This system of his was put into heavy use in World War II, but it was impossible to detect if planes that were approaching were yours or the enemy's. The Germans discovered that if a plane was flying upside down, it gave off a different radar signal than a plane flying right side up. So German planes, when they got within range, would fly upside down to avoid being shot down by their own side. When the English found out about this, they decided to see if they could create a device that would broadcast back a signal to tell the radar the difference between their ships and the enemy's. Once again, Watts was put to work to develop this system. He was able to create a device that when it received a radar signal, it began broadcasting a signal. The radar could detect the first RFI device was called the IFF, or Identify Friend or Foe device, and was placed on every British plane. Later, in the 1960s, a paper was written on how this system could be used to identify objects, and corporations began pouring money into researching this idea to detect when an item left the store if it had been paid for or not. They eventually came up with electronic article surveillance tags, which are still used to this day. In the mid-1970s, Washington was looking for a better way to track nuclear materials. They decided to modify the RFID tags to be activated by gate antennas when the trucks they were attached to passed by them. These tags would relay all kinds of information about the cargo the trucks were carrying. After the scientist that developed this advance left the military, he took his ideas with him into the private sector and came up with a RFID device that you can carry on your keychain or in your car that can pay for tolls as you pass through them on the highway. By the 1980s, the device was modified again to be used in the tracking of livestock. It was shrunk in size and converted to UHF radio waves, which allow it to receive its energy from the scanning device. So no longer would an onboard power source be necessary. These new devices were inserted into tiny glass tubes and placed under the animal's skin. One of the problems they were having was that it was hard to keep track of which animal had gotten which medicine and which one needed it. As a result, some animals would receive double or triple or more doses of something, while others would not receive any. This fixed the problem and cut back on livestock losses. The same tech is still used around the world today and was even placed inside cards to allow people access to buildings. Eventually, the technology was upgraded to a 13.56 megahertz system. This is still being used today for such things as chips in car keys to signal to the car that it is okay to start. In the 1990s, the RFID tech took a major step forward. IBM developed a RFID tag that operated at a very high UHF frequency and could be read at great distances. Unfortunately for IBM, they fell in hard times and had to abandon their research, and their patents and research was sold to a company named Intermetic, which was a company that dealt in barcodes. This was the beginning of the saturation of RFID tech. Intermetic started putting these devices on everything, from shipping containers to farm equipment. No longer did you have to scan each item that came in, but you could have a remote system scan the whole shipment as it rolled by and add it to your inventory. This gave way to the Auto ID Center, which was set up through a grant by some major contributors like Procter & Gamble and Gillette at MIT. The system they developed at MIT began using cheap chips that carried very little data on them, but the data they did carry could be linked through the internet to access a wide range of data that companies could use to track their shipments. Now, when a shipment leaves a factory, the information is simply sent to a network that alerts the buyer that his purchase has been shipped and is on the way. When something is purchased in stores, the system just sends out a request for more of that product. The loss of sales due to lack of product is slowly becoming a thing of the past. With this new tech spreading to all corners of the supply chain industry.